Hey everybody, Wyatt Paints here. Today is going to be part 2 of my Resin 3D printing guide. And in this video, we're going to be covering orientating the model, hollowing the model, adding some drain holes, and then after printing, I'm going to show you how to remove those supports and properly clean your part to prepare for curing. Let's get started. So to begin, it's important to first orient the part into position that it will be printed in. Here, I've loaded a Freddy Krueger head that I'll be painting in a future video. Since the head is pretty much a sphere, the orientating here is more to choose where we want the supports to go in order to preserve the most surface detail. The easy choice here is to have the face pointing up as it angles both of the adjoining flat surfaces towards the build plate. Since these areas will be covered once assembled, I don't care if they have support marks. This also ensures that the face, which will get most of the attention, will be pristine. Now that I have it in the direction I want it printed in, it's time to hollow the part. Clicking here opens up the hollowing menu. Let's go over the settings real fast. First up is wall thickness. This should be self-explanatory. I find 1.8mm is a good thickness. Don't go below 1mm. It might save you a bit more resin, but your part will be super weak and may break when removing the supports. And going over 2mm will add more strength at the cost of more resin and the extra weight of the final piece. This is very much a case of diminished returns. Next is precision. This is how accurately the inside of the model will conform to the outside. Setting this too high can result in some funky geometry. I find 50% works in most cases. The next setting is infill structure and density. This creates a lattice support system inside your part. I like to use a 10% infill myself. It saves a lot of resin without interfering with the cleaning of your model. Finally, you want inner tick so that it removes the inner part being hollow. Ticking outer will result in the outer skin being removed. The hollowing process animation could be left off as it just slides the layer viewer from top to bottom after hollowing the part. Depending on the size and complexity of the part, this process may take a minute or two. Now that it's done, we can check the part for any weird artifacts that may have shown up and see the infill structure. With my now hollow part, I need to add holes for two reasons. One, to drain out uncured resin, but more importantly, to relieve the vacuum that will form in this part as it prints. If this is not done properly, the vacuum will rip the part from the supports and it'll stick to the FEP, causing a print failure. Clicking here opens up the holes menu. The settings here are pretty straightforward. Shape is personal preference. I use a circle. For size, you want holes that are at least 2mm wide, but I think closer to 4 is more useful. And personally, I've gone as high as 10. It really depends on the part and where you're trying to fit the hole. Next is the depth. You want this to be thicker than the walls of your model. Since my walls are 1.8mm, I set this to 2.5mm. The next setting chooses the orientation of the hole. In most cases, you want this to be determined by the surface of the model that you're adding the hole to. The keep a hole option will place the hole you cut out onto your build plate. You can use this option if you plan on filling the hole after printing, as you can use this piece as the plug. Personally, all my holes are hidden, so I don't bother and save on the resin. Finally, dig hole continuously allows you to make multiple holes without re-clicking the dig a hole button. I find this useful because you will want at least 2 holes per hollow part, so I leave it on to save a bit of time. Now for the placement of the first hole. You want this as close to the build plate as you can get it, as it will relieve that vacuum pressure as quickly as possible. Also, try to use a place that will be hidden. In this case, these flat areas will be covered once the final assembly is done, so they're easy choices. If you were doing a base or something similar, the underside would be a good place as well. Once the first hole is placed, you'll want a second hole. This is for when you're trying to clean out the part. Having 2 holes allows one to let your cleaner in while the other one releases gas. This speeds it up immensely, so do not undervalue it. Next, the part needs support. Due to its size, I chose to use medium supports. My auto support settings did a pretty good job to start, but this will need a few more manually placed ones on the inside. Using the layer slider, I can check and find these areas by looking for islands to appear. Islands are areas to be printed that are not connected to a support or another part already supported. Here, I found some in the mouth and eyes. Now, these don't always cause print errors, but it's a good idea to take care of them so they don't. To do so, leave the layer slider on the first few layers that the island appears on, then flip your model over and zoom in through the bottom. Once the camera moves inside your part, place the support on the island. Do this for every island you see as you move up the layers to ensure a successful print. Now that Freddy's head is angled, hollowed, and supported, let's do these steps again, but with his hat. In this case, I angled the hat on its edge to reduce the cross-sectional area of the part. I made sure that the forward-facing part of his hat is pointed up for the best surface finish, like his face. Next, I hollowed the hat to save on resin. I increased the wall thickness so that the brim would be solid. In this case, it reduces the chances of extra voids being made there, so that there was only one center hollow area. Next, I added the holes. The first hole went as close to the build plate as possible to relieve any of that vacuum pressure. Then, I added 2 more for easy cleaning. Lastly, I added the supports. While there are a few on visible surfaces, most of these are on the brim, and thus will be easily removed. Also, I didn't need any internal supports, so this should be good to print. Here my parts have been removed from the build plate, and they look great. My post-print workflow goes like this. First, I remove the supports. If you're having trouble with this step, you may be using too many supports on your model. If parts of your model are breaking when removing supports, you may want to try switching to a smaller support and using a hairdryer to warm them up. Doing both should make it easier. Just be careful with the hairdryer around IPA, as it does have a heating element. Next, I use a 3-bucket cleaning method. This first bucket has really old used IPA that at this point might be 50% resin. It's not a big deal as this is only the first step. I make sure to fill up the parts and swish them around to get a really good rinse of the inside as well. This is also a place where I use an old toothbrush to clean the surface. This helps a ton to get most of the uncured resin off. Next is my second bucket. This is much cleaner IPA. Once this bucket gets so cloudy that I can't see the bottom, it gets poured into the first bucket. But for now, this is fine. Again, each part gets dunked, filled up, swished around a few times. The important thing to do is when emptying out the IPA from a part is to watch it draining to see if it's coming out clear or if it's cloudy. If it's cloudy, you have a lot more resin on the inside and didn't do a good enough job in the first bucket. After a few dunks, swishes, and drains for each part, I move on to my final container. This one has clean IPA, and as soon as it gets even the slightest bit cloudy, I pour it into the second bucket and put fresh IPA into it. Again, like before, I give them a dunk and fill up the part with IPA. Give it a few swishes and then drain, looking for any cloudiness. After a few times of running clear, the part is ready for drying and curing. And that brings us to the end of episode 2 of my Resin 3D printing guide. I'd like to take this moment to thank our patrons, which there are 2 now, both The Macho and FedEx Podcast Guy. Thank you so much. Your continued support allows me to make great content like this. And if you'd like to join them, be sure to check out the links to my Patreon in the description below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask it in the comments, and I'll try my best to get to them. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.